Good morning. Thanks for joining us here this morning. I just wanted to put some final emphasis on some important safety restrictions that we have in place for the city parks this weekend as we enter into the holiday weekend for Easter. The city has 185 parks, and annually the Saturday and Sunday of the Easter holiday weekend are the busiest 2 days of activity that we see in those parks. Several dozen of those parks on those days are busy, super busy, and really at capacity or near capacity on those days. So a number of restrictions that we have in place that we've been messaging and communicating in some different ways over the last week as we look to promote social and physical distancing and just remind people that this public health emergency and pandemic, certainly an unprecedented situation, that this really just is not the year to be out and enjoying the parks on Easter weekend. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the Parks and Recreation Director, Inger Erickson, who will explain more about the restrictions, about some of the other guidelines that we are communicating about physical and social distancing when you're enjoying outdoor recreation. And then after that, we'll be available for any questions or one-on-one interviews that anybody would like to do. So with that, I will turn it over to Inger.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you again for being here today. I want to introduce a couple people behind me. Cynthia Aguilar is one of our assistant directors in the City of Phoenix, and Alonzo Avitia is our natural resources deputy director. He's the person who's in charge of the rangers, and so the folks that are going to help us this weekend, in addition to the rest of our recreation staff, to make sure that we keep our parks safe and available for everybody to use appropriately. As we've mentioned earlier, the parks will have several restrictions, including no restrooms available. There will be no picnicking, no grilling. Really, the only thing that we will allow in the parks this weekend will be walking on the walking paths or enjoying the green space, maybe throwing a ball to a very small group of people, your family members. But again, this is not the time to come to the parks for picnicking and grilling and those large gatherings that we typically see at the parks on Easter. It just isn't the right time to do that, given the circumstances that we have today. And that includes not only the Sunday Easter day, but also Saturday. Saturday is also usually a day we see a lot of big picnics, and that isn't something that's acceptable this year in the parks. We will have ambassadors and park rangers out at all the parks to educate people and communicate. The parking lots will be closed. The only parking that will be allowed is if someone has an accessibility placard, and those folks will be allowed to come into the park and park. And again, just to walk or use the green space for kicking a ball around or throwing a ball around, those types of things. Staff has been working really, really hard to get communication out there. And again, we want to make sure that we use our parks safely. We want to make sure that everybody is able to enjoy the walking space if that's something they want to do, but really we're encouraging people to stay home this Easter. Again, if you do come to the park, if you're not feeling well, we're going to ask you not to come to the park. If you do come to the park, we're going to ask you to be 6 feet apart from other people. In small groups, if we see large groups, the ambassador is going to ask you to comply with the CDC regulations. And again, it's in a very important time in the history of our world. And also the City of Phoenix, we just want to make sure that you use the park safely. And with that, I guess I'll ask if there's any questions.
What are you going to do if somebody doesn't listen or grill, try to eat?
So the question is, what are we going to do if somebody doesn't listen or if somebody tries to bring grills in, those kinds of things? We're going to educate them that that's not appropriate for this day. There will be ambassadors, as I had mentioned. If the ambassadors can't get them to comply, then we'll ask a supervisor to come over and assist. And if the supervisor can't get them to understand, then we'll ask rangers to come and help as well. But we're going to lead with education, and we're really going to try to make sure that people understand the situation that we're in, which most of our community does understand. And I don't expect we'll have too much of an issue. I really think that our community's understanding what it is, and just a few bits of education will help them.
After Sunday, can people grill and stuff, or is this kind of throughout this entire process?
This is for the weekend, because as Easter weekend, we typically see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people together, and that's just not appropriate for this time. Thank you.
Will you have anyone after this weekend also standing by them for the following weekend in case people just decide to postpone the gatherings?
So the question is about postponement. We've seen a decrease in people coming to the parks already. we've blocked off picnic tables and ramadas just in general. So you can still come into the park and have a small picnic in the future, but Easter weekend is not the time. The grills will be available too, but again, if we see large gatherings of people in the future, we'll continue to educate even after Easter, because until this situation is over, until the pandemic is reached the point that we need to be able to loosen up some of the things, bathrooms are still going to be closed, ramadas are still going to be closed. The open space is still available for people to come and get some exercise and recreation. It is important for people to stay out and get fresh air, and then make sure you go back home and stay in your small family groups.
What would you tell folks that think, we're going to be outside, it's open air, it's going to be okay if we're in a group, it's not like we're enclosed inside someone's house. What would you like to tell folks?
So the question was, what about when you're outside and you're not enclosed in a space? You still have to maintain that 6-foot distance. You still have to follow the CDC guidelines. We still want you to be in small groups, preferably family groups that you're already living with, and not groups of people that you're not normally in contact with.
Where should people go for more information?
People should go to phoenix.gov for more information on what is allowed and what is not allowed in the park system during this unprecedented time.
Why is this so important for you guys to do?
So the question is, why is this so important? It's really, really important because, again, on the Easter weekends, we see so many people congregating so close together, and that's the danger, right? It's not just your family members. You get involved into picnics and games with other people, and that's not really what we should be doing in this time, in this day. That time will come again, and when that time comes, the parks will be open for those kinds of activities. But today and this Easter weekend, we really need to make sure that we do our part to keep the spread down.
How often is the City of Phoenix Parks and Rec communicating with other Valley City Parks and Rec departments?
So the question is, how often do we communicate with other parks and recreation departments across the valley? We have a meeting once a week, that we talk about everything that's going on in our various cities. And so we communicate regularly. We have a great state association, the Arizona Parks and Recreation Association, that really helps funnel us together and keep us together. The National Recreation and Park Association as well. And so we've used all those resources. They're very valuable, and we see what's going on in other parts of the country, and we get some information from them to help us guide what we might need to do in the future.
Can you give us an update on trail restrictions?
Absolutely. So the trails are open again for socially distanced and socially responsible hiking, keeping that 6-foot distance. We have limitations at some of our more popular trailheads. For example, Papago, the Hole in the Rock, that is limited to a certain amount of people going up, and then when they come down, other people can go up, and the immediate parking is also closed at this time for that particular amenity. Cholla Trail is closed. We're doing some maintenance there now. Echo Canyon, that is limited to some parking. So when it's about 50% full, we allow some people to come in and go out at the rate that we can maintain that trail safely. Piestewa as well. And then again, another one that you wouldn't think is maybe as popular for hiking, but maybe more for driving up to, Dobbins Lookout in South Mountain. That one has restrictions as well, because again, we were seeing a high volume of cars and then congregating at the top. So there's some restrictions there as well. Thank you again, and again, stay safe, stay healthy, enjoy the parks responsibly. Thank you.